Hello and welcome to another episode of Umwe Sit Downs. I'm of course your host Brian Akambonde, and today I am joined by two special guests who have worked together, Oluchi Ogbu and Benjamin Maiangwa. Let's start with Oluchi. Please welcome to the show.
Thank you for having us, Brian. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good, but certainly probably not as good as Benjamin looks and sounds today. Benjamin, how's it going over there?
Doing very well. Thanks so much, Brian, for having us.
All right. I believe our conversation today is being done from three different continents, if I'm correct. We have Oluchi Ogbu from the University of Manitoba, and then Benjamin Maiangwa from Durham University, which sounds like a university in England. I didn't confirm yet, but maybe Benjamin can just quickly confirm that for me.
Yeah, it is in the UK, but I'm currently in Canada.
Okay. Well, interesting thing, despite where we're calling in from, we're talking about Nigeria, right? Where on the 1st of June, President Buhari tweeted the following, and the quote reads, many of those misbehaving today are too young to be aware of the destruction and loss of lives that occurred during the Nigerian civil war. Those of us in the fields for 30 months who went through the war will treat them in the language they understand. And so this tweet, was very interesting, and that's why I brought this to the two guests on the show to kind of learn a bit more about what's behind the tweet and the response it has sparked in Nigeria. The tweet I think was interestingly referred to in an article the dynamic duo here wrote, which is sort of bothering an open sore, which is the Biafran war, or Biafra. And I just wanted to then and for the listeners out there who don't know, after following this tweet, outcry led to Twitter. I believe deleting the tweet and also temporarily or indefinite. I mean temporarily, I guess locking the president's account, and then in response to that, the Nigerian government indefinitely suspended Twitter. And so I want to hear from Oluchi here. Will the Biafran controversy be answered, or will it remain an open sore? Because again, the Biafran war, for the listeners out there, is essentially a huge part of Nigeria's history that has in some way been awoken by this very public statement by the president and the different responses and public attention that it has received. So yes, will the Biafran controversy be answered, or will it remain an open sore that will keep being opened more and more, time and time again?
Well, Brian, that's an interesting question that you just asked. So before I provide some context to that, I just wanted to state briefly that the issues in Nigeria are complex. So one's analysis would definitely depend on where you decide to focus on. So in our article published by the conversation, we shared our thoughts in light of recent security challenges, and we talked about the deleted tweets and the Twitter ban and how this emphasized existing challenges in the country, and also highlights unresolved questions and issues, which you just referred to as an open sore. This, of course, connects to this growing Biafran agitations in the southeastern part of the country. And we also try to look at a disconnection to history and differences in Nigeria. So for those who do not know, Nigeria is ethnically diverse. We have like a population of over 200 million people spread across 36 states. And then we also have the Federal Capital Territory. But one thing that I would like to point out here is that since we gained independence in 1960, we've seen, Nigeria has witnessed different forms of conflicts within her political zones. And the Nigerian Civil War, also known as the Biafran War, which you just talked about, was one of the most destructive in that country. So perhaps I'll leave that. I just wanted to provide a brief context here, and I'll leave that there for now. But in a direct answer to your question, I believe that, the Biafran War or the Nigerian Civil War was not only very damaging, that history has shaped Nigeria in terms of our, socio-political relations and governance, and, the mentality of the people. And it has also heightened tensions within the country. And with all of these tensions came, this deleted tweet, and then the Twitter ban. So, but Nigeria won't be the first country to ban Twitter, but being a democratic country, many would agree that the Twitter ban goes against, Nigeria's, constitution. So in regards to whether it's an open sore or not, as you put it, what is happening right now, the insecurity that we have in different parts of the country affects all Nigerians. So it's not just, the Southeast alone. So irrespective of ethnic or tribal affiliations. And the Twitter ban, as you mentioned, has become a question about security, about freedom and access, the right to live without persecution, irrespective of one's, identity, where one is geographically located. We're looking at things like the right to life and security, right to vote and be voted for, the right to seek for and attain leadership based on merit. All of these issues have been going on since independence. So as just to look at it from the point of a student in the field of peace and conflict studies, the question for me has always been on how best to address injustice, whether perceived or real. And while doing this, also how to ensure that people are safe and protected at all times, irrespective of where they are located geographically. So the president's tweet, was in response to the security challenges in the Southeast. And so many saw that tweet as, negative, because it referred to this history, this history of the Nigerian Civil War, a war that many felt has not really been addressed in a way that will provide, justice to the victims. So it's an ongoing question. And however you decide, to look at the Nigerian Civil War, the Biafran War, depends on, your analysis and your focus.
Yes. I think for the most part, what I appreciated from your response, Oluchi, there is just the humility with which you started off with, which is that this history is complex, right? And it's a complex issue to kind of look at, because, as you said, the tweet was in response to kind of more immediate and recent, kind of unrest in the Southeast, and then posting it, though, right, was easy to connect. And for many problematic, because it could be connected to the Civil War that, as you said, kind of is interestingly still an open book with not necessarily closure for everybody, right? But I'm curious, Benjamin, is there any comment on your end regarding Biafra as a controversy that remains something that can that is an open source, something that can be opened up, or by a tweet like what we've seen from the Nigerian president, or maybe another not necessarily political figure, but another figure could say something and then easily spark interest or open spark interest, or maybe negative energy that would arise by simply being saying something connotated to the Biafran War.
Yeah, thanks so much, Brian. And I think I certainly would agree with Oluchi that the Nigeria-Biafra issue is quite complex, and the war itself of 1967 to 1970 and reconstruction policies afterward have, continued to shape the political development of the country. But not only that, the social relations among the three, major groups, and especially the Hausas, the Yorubas, and the Igbos. These are the main groups contesting power at the center. Now, to answer your question, whether it will remain an open sore or would be answered, that Biafran question, I think it depends on what kind of answer we're talking about. Some people might argue that it is currently being answered at the moment. So the protests of the pro-Biafrans are meeting, as we see, the firepower of the state. So it's been answered somehow. But I guess the main question is, what are the issues that require answers? Now, there are several issues, with the makeup of Nigeria and the events that led to the war. But I think it is better to always focus on the war itself and the aftermath. In the aftermath of the war, there were victors and vanquished. So the head of state at the time, Yakubu Gowon, said, the war had no victors or vanquished. I think, that wasn't really true, at the time. There were certainly victors and vanquished. Properties of Igbos were taken over in places where they had lived in some part of Nigeria prior to the war. The 20-pound policy that was meant to resuscitate them didn't really help out, and even its disbursement was fraught with irregularities. The Human Rights Commission, known as the Oputa Panel, that President Obasanjo initiated at the advent of democratic rule in Nigeria in 1999, also really didn't do justice to the trauma and grievances of the Igbos, which have been passed on to the younger generations, the people that constitute the indigenous people of Biafra. Now, there are still veterans of the war in Southeastern Nigeria who are alive and living in difficulties with physical and psychological ailments from that war. A proper policy of reconstruction and rehabilitation will certainly cater to the needs of these people. It would create forums for continued sharing of stories about the war among different groups in the country, as well as a plan, to provide physical but also psychosocial treatment, to the survivors. Those are really immediate needs that I think were missed out in the aftermath of the war. A proper answer would also entail a mandatory, people have been talking about this, a mandatory teaching of history of the war and Nigerian history broadly in schools. History is not a subject that is appealing to many Nigerian students. So to be able to make that subject appealing and mandatory also, I think would be a good head start. A proper reconstruction also, I think, would entail continued negotiations with pro-Biafrans, who are carrying the vicarious trauma of the war. Many of these people are really doing their best in their daily lives to eke out a living. And they really seem reasonable in their dealings with others. So I believe that there is a room for constructive and even creative outcome that would begin to heal the wounds of the past. Nigerians understand hardship, and Nigerians have really grown to be resilient, over the years through years of military dictatorship, human rights abuses, ethno-religious violence, and so on. And they have still remained hopeful. The country has remained intact. So I think that the situation is still in a workable condition, if only the government will begin to invite people really who are ready to talk and to listen to them. The Igbo leaders, also have a role to play in this. It's not just the federal government. I think the Igbo leaders in the East should also begin to provide platforms for constructive engagement with these issues, and also respond to the plight of survivors in their own ways, rather than issuing, provocative speeches and rhetoric that only further divide Nigerians and also take little considerations of the effort that ordinary people on ground are making to stay positive and support each other. But, certainly there are issues of dysfunctional infrastructures, roads, electricity, water, that could also go a long way, to ameliorate some of these, issues that pro-Biafrans are raising. So really, I think that the solution could come from many quarters, from the federal government, but also from Southeastern Nigeria. The question is, will this kind of engagement happen under this current regime? Are the Igbo leaders themselves ready to consider a different engagement with the trauma of the war? Because even with Biafra, even if, Biafra should make it as a country, there will still be this trauma to be dealt with. And it wouldn't at that time be a Nigerian issue, because after the euphoria of having a new state has fizzled out, I think there will certainly be grievances from the war, as well as other inconceivable issues, particularly regarding, the minorities in that part of the country. So having a state is certainly one thing, but the issue of political justice, I think, like Oluchi mentioned, and forging an inclusive political community, I think is another thing altogether.
Right.
I'm not sure that we're ready for this right now.
Right. I think in a nutshell, it was very interesting to understand sort of the different stakeholders and places, right, that need to deliver some kind of answer, and you answer to then kind of went through describing the different stakeholders and how they could provide an answer to sort of putting a constructive ending, right, to the Biafran war, and essentially how it exists with us, with Nigerians today and going forward, right? And I think one of the things that I wanted to learn more about is also the severance of Nigerian regions. Is that because that's something that has been kind of considered widely, and so the aftermath of the Biafran war and the different issues that exist today as a result. And you did comment on that briefly, but I'd like for you to expand your thoughts a bit more on whether the severance of Nigerian regions are really the answer to sort of putting an end to the soul, quote unquote, which is the Biafran war, which we saw being awoken once again by President Buhari's tweet.
Yeah, thanks for the question. And I may want to go back a little bit further in history. Many Nigerians have come to accept that the country is a product of a forced marriage imposed by the British. In a way also, we've argued elsewhere that the country is more or less a company state rather than a nation in the strict sense of the term, because its purpose when it was set up, just like, many post-colonial societies, was to satisfy the economic interests of its captors, including now the indigenous leaders. They are still kind of operating really based on that company state model. So since independence in the 1960s, there have been attempts by various groups in the country to secede. So this secession kind of moves that we're seeing in either Southeastern or Southwestern Nigeria isn't new. So there have been attempts since Nigeria became independent in 1960 by various groups to break out of this so-called, forced marriage. We had, a prominent Nigerian politician saying the country was merely a geographical, entity. In 1966, Isaac Adakaboro in the Niger Delta region, and we know that the Niger Delta is another kettle of fish altogether. He declared the secession of the Niger Delta Republic. And a year later, the Southeastern region made a similar declaration, which led to the Nigeria-Biafra war and created the question that we're dealing with today, the Biafran question. Now, the Middle Belt constituencies, the minority groups or the so-called minority groups in the country have also not been left out of this disenchantment with the nature of the state and its polity. So even groups within the state level in the country, in the Middle Belt, are keen to have a state of their own. So not necessarily, break out as a country, but to have a state really that they could, I guess, achieve their autonomous interests. So there is a nervousness of belonging all over the country, a phenomenon that I have termed a crisis of belonging, in which, there is a little attachment that people feel to the idea of Nigeria. Chinua Achebe once said that, there is a death of patriotic consciousness amongst Nigerians. Nigerians are still, contending with how to properly manage power and break out of regional and religious sentiments, if at all. So these are the issues that have made many commentators, on Nigeria. And there is this book by Karl Mayr, written, I think, in 2000, to conclude that Nigeria has fallen. He titled the book, "This House Has Fallen." Now, the book, as with many others like it, chronicled, the disorder, the corruption, the rising religious and ethnic tensions, the heavy-handedness of the state, the environmental degradation, especially in the Niger Delta, the killings of the 9 Niger Delta activists, including Ken Saro-Wiwa, and the reign of impunity, that have continued to bedevil the country of more than 200 million people. So there are historical trauma and grievances, really, in addition to this, based on we had the jihadist conquest in northern Nigeria, the Nigeria Biafra war in the southeast, and so many others, other cases of sectarian violence. So the aftermath of the war created an excuse for the militarization of the country, right? In which I think successive Nigerian head of states, the only solution they have devised to maintain the territorial integrity of the country is through really the use of violence, which maybe explains why Nigeria has had, military rule from that time of the war, even prior to that, up to 1999. And that also explains the recent tweet by the president, who himself was the military head of state in the 80s, that he would treat the Biafran protesters in the language that they understand. So the manner in which, I think before the statement by the president, the NSAS protest was also squashed, and the arrest and torture of protesters and critics, even online, just by merely criticizing the government on Facebook, have led to allegations that, this administration only understands the language of violence. So this language of violence has created a sense within Nigerians that, they have been left to their own devices, and that the reprieve that they need may not come from this administration. But I think, I'm not sure I'm answering the question, but I'm also giving a context to understand why this moves and why people are kind of clamoring for secession. But I also think that there are reasons to be hopeful. Everyday realities in Nigeria indicate that even though the country cries out for a new patriotic, consciousness to survive, there are evidences on ground to underscore that ordinary Nigerians strive for this consciousness in their relations with each other. People across the various groups have intermarried, and even back home in northern Nigeria, where I come from, my neighbors are Igbos, and they have bought land in that area and established their homes. So in every part of Nigeria, you'll find, pockets of people from different ethnicities and religions cohabiting the same spaces in relative amity. So I think we must continue also to emphasize this fact and celebrate such positive encounters in our dealings with each other. Muslims have shielded Christians from attacks and vice versa. So in essence, I think there is a demonstration of goodwill among many Nigerians. So I think our problem is largely, political, and may take some form of, again, going back to justice, some form of political justice to resolve it. And we're not talking about a resolution in a year or decade here. State formation could take a truly long time. whether Nigeria breaks up or not. So restructuring, as you mentioned, or at least many people have been suggesting, could be one way of going about it. The idea is to move power from the center and give the region some level of independence. But this may only provide a stopgap solution, because as I hinted, Nigeria is a complex environment with hundreds of minority groups who may not also want to be yoked with the dominant groups like the Fulani, the Hausas, the Yoruba, or the Igbos.
Right. Yes. And wow, Benjamin, again, a very rich answer and sort of, picture that you painted here. I think what's interesting, though, from your last response, Benjamin, is that you clearly showed how, the issue is so complex that it may not necessarily be that diffusing power from a president of multiple states to then, and I guess to some extent or to full extent, making Nigerian states sovereign or more sovereign may not necessarily be the answer, because there's so many dynamics at play. But there's a lot to be hopeful for, because as you said, people are longing for their own and a new sense of a patriotic identity in Nigeria, which is interesting to learn about. But I'll have Oluchi, weigh in with a comment, additional thoughts on any of what we discussed. I know we've done more than just answer the two questions that I posed. So anything that Oluchi you want to weigh in on, please just unmute yourself and let us know what it is you're thinking.
Yeah, I was just thanking Benjamin for that very insightful commentary, giving us so much context and the history and his thoughts and hopes for the country. I certainly agree with Benjamin, that even though we are diverse, there is strength in our diversity, and we see that, that we know that Nigerians are strong and creative, and we see that, compassion, empathy, creativity displayed. We've seen that over and over again when it comes to the kind of relations that people have in Nigeria. I also really like the nervousness, the nervousness of belonging, as Benjamin put it. And it is that nervousness of belonging that has been quite challenging for most people. It is true that people identify at different levels. You can identify as an Igbo, Yoruba, Hausa person and still be a Nigerian. But sometimes, in Nigeria, when people identify, they first, identify as based on their, ethnic group or affiliations first. And we see that as being one of the, many reasons, why people have had issues in the past. So that nervousness of belonging is what has caused so many ethnic clashes, and so many other past conflicts that we've had in our history. When I think about that, I tell myself that although it may be challenging, to change belief systems and attitudes, I think that one issue that we have to tackle as a group, a united one Nigeria, is that of, emancipation. When I talk about emancipation, I mean that of the mind, from this divisive thoughts and relations that has fueled, violent conflicts in the past. So who we are, who we think we are, and who we are should not really divide us or drive us apart from this, our common humanity. Far from being Nigerians, we are far from being Igbos, Hausas, Yorubas. As Benjamin said, he's had neighbors, living together. He's had, people from different groups, like his neighbors were Igbos. I'm Igbo, Benjamin is from the north. I'm from the southeast, for instance, and Benjamin is from the north. And then you see us working together. And it's the same thing over and over. We've heard stories, even during the war, of how people helped each other, So what I'm saying is people should be able to have faith in their government. People should be able to know, to believe, that the government will do right by them. And then the government at all levels, local, state, federal, should start reflecting, what I'm thinking. I know this may be too theoretical, but sometimes I think of, a situation where we can have like maybe a national day of self-reflection, if there's anything like that, to think about, because as we know there can't be peace without justice. As Benjamin mentioned earlier, so many people live through this war. They want some sort of acknowledgement, recognition. They want some sort of justice. We can't move past this without addressing that. So when I think about the civil war and ways to move us forward, I think about this act of maybe reflecting, as one, letting people mourn and telling them, we see you, we hear you, we know that you suffered so many losses, so how can we think as a country, how can we avert this in the future? So we cannot change the past. It is true, we've heard that, and we know that we cannot change the past, but perhaps we can decide how this past, this our history, how this shared history, this past would affect us in the future. And the government has a lot to do with that, to move us, towards this hurt that some of us to carry around us. So to think of the influences, another thing that I think the government can do for us as we think about moving forward is to think about, the influences around us. I mean, what culture is at work in our lives, in the way we relate with each other? What culture do we see displayed even in the government? And, how does that affect, negative actions? How can we change that? Our learning will surely take time. There is no doubt, because we look at us, it's been how many years now since 1960, 1966 series of coup, and we are still, we're still talking about the aftermath of the coup, the civil war and all of that. But hopefully, I cannot lose hope as a peace and conflict studies scholar. I believe that we'll get past this. What matters is, how do we protect lives? How do we make this government a human-centered one, so that people do not live, people do not go on thinking that this government is partial or is based on ethnicity, not on merit and things like that. How do we put people first? How do we secure the lives of all persons, irrespective of, their ethnic affiliations? And another thing that Benjamin said is education. Yes, I agree that education is key to national development. I mean, childhood education, first and foremost, is very important in realizing this dream of one Nigeria, if we must move past where we are. Not only do I believe that it will promote national development, it is also the foundation of anything great that we hope to come out of Nigeria. So I think that, education will change this constant strife that, we see happening in the country, all parts of the country. So yes, as Benjamin said, learning history early is important. I believe that a sound educational policy will equip students to become future leaders. Students can also learn our history early from the past, and then they can seek better solutions. So I think that one way that we can do this is to this Nigerian civil war, its causes, because it keeps taking us back. If we don't address it, we'll keep going back. So what are the causes? What are the consequences? How do we teach students in a way that they understand? Because history is very important in negating, these constant battles, that we find ourselves in today. So the history of both sides of the war can be taught, like the Nigerian side of it and the Biafran side of it, can be taught in a fair and just manner, so that students can have the fact of the war as they grow, and then they can seek better solution. But from what I'm seeing, the government is doing all it can to combat the insecurity challenges that we have. Whether or not it is sufficient, it's left for anyone to analyze. So I read that he's been working on different ways to strengthen his administration, so that it can address the complex issues that we face. As I told you, the issues that we have in Nigeria is very complex. So, but irrespective of what we're reading that he's doing, there's this perceived lack of equality.
Yeah, I think it was definitely a pleasure to talk with the two of you about the history of a war, that really is the context to to many things, issues and good things, right? And certainly, hope that for our listeners out there that you now understand that, the tweet by the Nigerian president has so much more beneath it. It's really the tip of an iceberg. The aftermath of the tweet, it does certainly give you a glimpse of just how complex the issue that it's sort of touching on is.
So I was just saying that it's sometimes good to have like a balanced view of whatever is happening. So in this analysis, we must also consider the government's past interactions with Twitter. You just mentioned that, and how these have influenced, the Twitter ban. So the presidency or the current government sees Twitter, as a threat, which is not surprising from the federal government's perspective. The social media platform has been a means through which, this present government has been undermined in the past, like the NSAS movement that Benjamin mentioned earlier. There's also the argument, when you go on Twitter, you read different sides, and then you read the, comment from the presidency. There was also argument that Twitter's rules in the past have not been, fairly applied, as they have failed to, immediately hold others accountable whose tweets violated, Twitter's terms of use, such as those from pro-Biafran, leadership. Some people might even say that it would have felt less, although some people might say it would have felt less threatening if the president's words were, framed differently. Maybe saying that, for instance, those instigating violence in the southeastern part should remember what has happened in the past. So they should be conscious of this history so that it doesn't repeat itself. Were it framed differently, I don't know if, this whole Twitter brouhaha would have, come out the way it did. That said, attacking, law enforcement agents and government property can never be seen as fighting for fairness and justice. For those who would say that they are fighting for fairness and justice in any part of the country, not just the Southeast, destroying government property and attacking police people, it makes policing very hard, and you're making the government's job very, very hard. These issues, are in addition to other security challenges in the country, where farmlands are being destroyed, civilians are being killed, so many people have been kidnapped for ransom, and then you have that people have also been kidnapped for rituals, and then we have different violent conflicts going on in different parts of the country. And, all of this makes securing lives very problematic for any government, so for the government and these things, they also encourage criminal activities. So some people might even use all of this so-called fighting for justice and fairness as a smokescreen, for their own nefarious objectives. So we must take all of this into account when looking at, this whole Twitter issues.
And I thank you all so much, really, for your input today. Very, as I'm sitting here, I'm just filled with so many ideas to ponder on, and hopefully, if you do allow me, I'll probably send you a follow-up, or if you do write any further, I'm sure I myself and the listeners would love to hear. But from us here at Umwe and our two amazing guests, Benjamin and Oluchi, we're very grateful to have a conversation about this, and I hope that you, the listener out there, have learned something as well. And that brings us to our conversation here.